thanks to all of you joining us here in person, as well as all of you tuning in from around the world. I'm Rachel Stoll. I'm Senior Vice President of Research Programs here at the Stimson Center, and it is really my great pleasure to welcome you all here today for a very special event. The Stimson Center is a foreign policy think tank that was founded in 1989 here in Washington, D.C. We promote and pursue international security and shared prosperity through applied research and independent analysis, global engagement, and policy innovation. 2024 is the 35th anniversary of the Stimson Center, and we are marking the occasion with a year of global exploration together with some of the greatest foreign policy and international security minds today. We're delighted to have, as part of this anniversary series, a very special guest and a friend to the Stimson Center, the Honorable Carlos Del Toro. Secretary Del Toro has held many posts in his career, as our board chair, Sue Chodakewitz, will no doubt outline in her introduction. With more than 2 decades of naval service, Secretary Del Toro has been a commander, a corporate founder, a president, and a CEO. Somehow, amid all of this, Secretary Del Toro managed to serve on Stimson's board of directors, joining Stimson in 2019. With his guidance and counsel, the Stimson Center really honed our strategic focus and approach in valuable new ways in building our strategic supporter base as we took on some of the most complex challenges of our time. In 2021, I must say that he was shamelessly poached from Stimson's board for a new role, that of the 78th Secretary of the Navy. Yeah. And although we grudgingly did let him go, it is our pleasure to welcome Secretary Del Toro home to Stimson, and it is such a pleasure to have you here with us today as we mark our 35th anniversary. I will admit, however, on that front, the U.S. Navy does have us beat. It's only the 35th anniversary of the Stimson Center. That's no small feat for a think tank here in Washington, but the United States Navy is marking its 250th year next year. I don't know what the traditional gift for a 250th anniversary is. I believe, though, it's called the semi-quincentennial. We can look that up. But you have our greatest...
I'm hoping for a new aircraft.
He has a list.
I'll put it on your list, yeah. You have our greatest praise and respect, Secretary, as you stand at the helm of an institution that is really steeped in deep tradition and legacy, and one that is also constantly exploring how it can develop and evolve to meet the changes of tomorrow. In the hour ahead, the Honorable Del Toro will be joined by Stimson Center Board Chair Sue Chodakewitz to explore the future of U.S. maritime power for global security. In addition to her role as Stimson's Board Chair, which of course is her most important role, Sue serves as Cadmus's Executive Vice President for Public Sector Strategy, where she's responsible for overseeing the development and execution of Cadmus's public sector growth strategy in the U.S. and globally. Previously, Sue was president and CEO of Nathan Associates prior to its acquisition by Cadmus. Before that, Sue served as president of Tetra Tech and as senior vice president at SAIC. In addition, she also spent about 10 years at Booz Allen Hamilton, supporting clients across multiple markets. Now, I know you're all as eager as I am to hear the conversation ahead, so I don't want to hold things up any longer. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest, the Honorable Carlos Del Toro, 78th Secretary of the United States Navy, in conversation with Stimson Board Chair Sue Chodakewitz. Secretary Del Toro, Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome to everyone here today. To say that it is a pleasure would be an understatement. As Rachel said, I had the pleasure to serve on the Stimson board with the Secretary, and it is wonderful to have him back here again with us. Needless to say, Stimson Center was just one stop on his way to do so much for the country and for the world. And I really want to just spend a moment trying to encapsulate his background, which is incredibly inspiring and impressive. Let's see, the Secretary was born in Havana, Cuba, and they immigrated to the U.S. with his family as refugees in 1962. Raised in Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of New York City, he attended public schools and received an appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy, where he earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in electrical engineering. Secretary Del Toro was commissioned as a surface warfare officer upon his graduation in 1983. His 22-year naval career included a series of critical appointments and numerous tours of duty at sea, where he helped manage the budgets of DoD, Department of State, CIA, DIA, National Reconnaissance Office, and the Peace Corps. After retiring at the rank of commander, Secretary Del Toro founded SBG Technology Solutions, Inc. in 2004. As its CEO and president, he supported defense programs across a host of immediate and long-term Department of Navy issue areas, including shipbuilding, AI, cybersecurity, acquisition programs, space systems, health, and training. He was sworn in as the 78th Secretary of the Navy on August 9th, 2021. Secretary Del Toro holds a Master's in National Security Studies from Naval War College, a Master's in a Master's in Space Systems Engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School, and a Master's in Legislative Affairs from George Washington University. It is wonderful to have you home again,
Thank you,
Secretary.
Susan. It's great to be home. Great to be back.
Great. Well, now that was the nice part. We have a lot of ground to cover, so here we go.
Let's go.
I will let people know that we are going to hold time for Q&A at the end, so get your questions ready. For those tuning in online, you can submit your questions at www.stimson.org/questions.
You're saying the Navy taking all lines.
Secretary Del Toro, as head of the Navy, you are responsible for an institution with over 900,000 sailors, Marines, reservists, and civilian personnel, as well as overseeing a budget of more than $210 billion. What's more, as Rachel noted, the U.S. Navy is marking a major milestone next year, 250 years since its founding. With all these considerations in mind, and given your position as the Secretary, could you outline for us what you have identified as the biggest and most pressing priorities for the Navy and Marine Corps, and what do you see as the greatest opportunities?
Well, thank you, Susan. First and foremost, thank you for having me today. It's a tremendous privilege to serve as the 78th Secretary of the Navy, and it's a privilege and an honor to be able to serve the nearly 1 million Marines, sailors, and civilians that I lead in the Department of the Navy, with now a budget of closer to $250 billion, actually, Susan. So we've gone from 210 to 250 by the 250th year. But having said that, it is a tremendous privilege to lead these brave men and women. And they are indeed brave men and women. Just for the past 6.5 months alone, we have been batting back now daily, if not every other day, Houthi attacks, over 200 engagements these past 6.5 months. These sailors, these men and women who serve in the Red Sea, are courageous in defending our national security interests there in the Red Sea, in the Mediterranean, and indeed around the globe, and it's a privilege to be able to work on their behalf, to provide them, as the Secretary of the Navy, my Title X responsibilities in delivering the most capable platforms and the most capable personnel to our combatant commanders around the world.
Thank you for that. The multifaceted nature of your role now, I mean, it's greater, I think, than ever before. And so what I'd like to do is sort of focus on different aspects of your role and work our way through some of those. Let me start with the Navy's role in securing economic interests. Last September, in a speech delivered at the Harvard Kennedy School, you said, and I quote, "History proves that, in the long run, there has never been a great naval power that wasn't also a maritime power, a commercial shipbuilding and global shipping power." End quote. In 2023, more than half of the world's commercial shipbuilding output came from China. In your opinion, is the U.S. ceding its commercial naval power at this moment and what are the actions that you're taking around this?
Well, we've already conceded our commercial shipbuilding capability to the Chinese. Luckily, we have allies in Japan and Korea who also have invested heavily in the commercial shipbuilding side of the house. But we have not, by any means, actually conceded our naval power. We have indeed the most powerful Navy and Marine Corps on the face of the earth in terms of the capabilities that we have, in terms of the lethality that we could bring to anywhere around the globe, as we are currently demonstrating today in the Pacific, and we're currently demonstrating in the Red Sea, and also in the defense of Israel as still yet another example. So we are indeed the most powerful, capable Navy and Marine Corps team in the world, and we don't plan on conceding that to anyone.
Message received, sir.
Absolutely. And if I may, Sue, we're doing it basically with three guiding principles that I've set for our Department of the Navy. One is strengthening our maritime dominance in every domain that we operate in: space, air, on the surface, on the subsurface, and in cyberspace as well, too. Second is cultivating a culture of warfighting excellence across the entire fleet and the force, the Navy and the Marine Corps. Training our warfighters to be the very best they can be while treating them all with dignity and respect. And then third is strengthening our relationships with our stakeholders, with industry, with Congress, with the rest of the government, and also with our allies and partners, more importantly, who are an essential part of our warfighting capability in every region around the world. I often say that it is the difference between us and our adversaries. We have plenty of allies and friends and partners who cooperate, who operate in a very interoperable way with us throughout all regions of the world.
Thank you. Secretary, I'd like to spend another second or two on the issue of shipbuilding. And that a recent report released by the Navy shows that several major shipbuilding programs were behind schedule and over budget. What can be done to ensure that Navy shipbuilding, which is central to the service's mission, as you said, can get on track?
So I believe we need to go to the root causes of the problems and how we got here. If you take a look at what happened basically in the early 1980s when President Reagan was president, he believed that we could actually leave the core elements of the shipbuilding industry, the commercial shipbuilding industry, to the private sector. And he was right. We did leave it to the private sector. And regretfully, countries like China took over with cheap labor, basically, and were able to really build up their commercial shipbuilding industry and dominate the market. Again, I'm also thankful to Japan and South Korea, for example, who also invested and are tremendous commercial shipbuilders today. But the commercial shipbuilding industry atrophied through the Cold War. We shut down many shipyards in this country, thinking that we would not need them. We became less competitive as well, too. And now we're at the point where our commercial shipbuilding industry has really suffered. It's atrophied, and we have to rebuild that one step at a time with what I call a national maritime statecraft. But because of that, our building of our naval capabilities, of our naval ships, have become far more expensive because there are far fewer shipyards that actually build our Navy ships. We have 4 public yards that do the maintenance on our aircraft and submarines in the Navy. We have 2 that do nuclear-powered work. We have 6 essentially major private shipyards in the private sector that build our submarines, our frigates, our destroyers, and our aircraft carriers.
Continuing on this issue for another moment, I mean, some of these delays, some of the challenges that you articulated, I mean, what is the balance between some domestic dysfunction, right, which might include supply chain challenges, shortages of skilled labor, versus international interference? And what is that balance, and what do we do about both sides of that?
So apart from the shortage and just having less commercial shipbuilders and less shipyards in the country, for example, we have been significantly negatively impacted by COVID. There's no question about that. The supply chain has been really negatively impacted by COVID. I think the bigger problem than that, more so, is actually the lack of blue-collar workers that we have in this country. And, you know, regretfully, we're a pretty divided country politically, you might say, but it really is time for Congress to get together and pass comprehensive immigration reform and increase the amount of legal immigration that we'll actually allow into this country, increase the amount of work visa programs that are authorized for blue-collar workers to come from other nations and actually do the work here as it has existed since the founding of our government, very much so. But it's a good thing that the economy is as strong as it is, obviously, with unemployment as low as it is in so many states across the country. And what we got to do is we got to open up the spigot a bit, basically, on legal immigration to allow blue-collar workers to come here, and also to devote an enormous amount of resources into retraining individuals so that they can actually work in our shipyards and be employed by the types of trades that are open to shipyard workers, for example. And we in the Department of the Navy and the Department of Defense are committed to that. Just as one example alone, in the next 5 years, we'll be pumping in $15 billion of investment into the submarine industrial base alone, an additional $1 billion investment into the surface industrial base as well. So these are the measures that we're trying to take to work with industry to bring these production rates up to where they need to be so that we can actually build more naval capability, while at the same time, a whole of government effort around the national maritime statecraft so that we can sort of invigorate our commercial shipbuilding to also get us to a better place.
And what about the other side of the equation? What about China's predatory practices? What are the actions that are ongoing now?
Well, they've been able to dominate the commercial shipbuilding industry worldwide because of those unfair practices, quite frankly. And as you probably know, there's a lawsuit at play now that's being considered by the U.S. Trade Representative, Ambassador Tai, to take a look at the unfair market practices of China when it comes to commercial shipbuilding. This is vital to what I believe will be the continuous, revitalization of our economy. And if we can actually get to the place where we could actually contribute through commercial shipbuilding in this country, it could help the economy and bring even more American jobs to this country. I've also gone around the world to South Korea and Japan and to other nations and encouraged them to invest in America, to actually come here and open up subsidiaries of their shipbuilding industries here in the U.S. There are numerous small and mid-sized shipyards around the country, for example, that could use that capital infusion and could create more American jobs here to help us build both our naval capability and our commercial shipbuilding capability.
Thank you. Let's turn to the Navy's role in the Indo-Pacific.
Sure.
Just a small little topic to address, right? I want to talk a little bit about both emerging challenges and opportunities. In this context, you recently visited the Western Pacific, specifically Yokohama, Japan, and South Korea, to tour shipyards over there. You noted that we have much to learn from these shipyards. What specifically did you see that you would like the U.S. to put into practice? And how do you hope to engage Japan and South Korea in the future? You touched upon this in some of your earlier remarks.
Absolutely. Well, Japan and South Korea are two of our very most important allies and partners, as was just recently demonstrated here, obviously, when the presidents of those countries came to the United States, and along with President Biden, really signed some historic agreements moving forward for mutual collaboration amongst the three of us. And it's really exciting in the Indo-Pacific when you see allies and partners working together as closely as we are. For example, we just had a naval operational exercise where we operated with Japan and the Philippines as well, too, for example. And now we have Balikatan, another major exercise that's taking place off the southern coast of the Philippines. These are all very, very exciting measures that we are collectively all taking together as one. But when I traveled to Japan and to South Korea, I was particularly impressed by the amazing amount of capital investment that they made in their own shipyards, right? Not just in the shipyard, but in the quality of life and quality of service of their shipyard workers outside the shipyards. So they come in, they build apartment buildings, they build hospitals, they build schools, they build entertainment facilities, for example, for their own shipyards to be able to work there and want to stay there, right? So their retention rates are very, very high. And they've made major investments in the digitization of the shipyard as well, too, so that they know at any one particular time, if you change something here on one side of the shipyard, what's going to be the impact on delivering that ship on time and on budget. So these are things that I think we could also import here to the United States to further strengthen our shipyards, both private and public shipyards.
Great examples. Do you think it's possible, viable, that co-production be an option going forward, given the relationship with these countries?
I think it can in some ways, forms and fashion, for example. There are abilities for us to be able to build certain modules overseas. We do this in the aircraft industry, for example. where in India, for example, we're building aircraft engines now, and applying them and reinstituting them here in the United States. So there are opportunities, I think, that we can pursue, and we need to keep open-minded about those opportunities so we can actually increase the production rates of our ships and aircraft.
Thank you. You mentioned global supply chains earlier. I'd like to focus on that for a moment, both in terms of their vulnerabilities and opportunities for more resilience and durability. Many people may not realize that 90% of our globally traded goods go by sea.
That's right.
Right? I knew you would know that.
Not to interrupt you for a second, but how many of you get Amazon packages at home? Yeah, the rest of you are lying. You get them just every day or every other day, right? The first and last leg of that journey may come by truck, but that middle leg comes to you because of the United States Navy and the navies of free democratic nations around the world as well that keep the sea lanes of communications open for free trade, as we are trying to currently do in the Red Sea. Didn't mean to interrupt you, Susan, but I think it's a great example.
Great point. And to your point, right, maritime trading volumes are expected to triple by 2050.
That's right.
So this isn't going anywhere, right?
And it's also the trillions of financial transactions that actually takes place on fiber optic cables under the sea as well, too, on the seabed, that are incredibly important to the global economy.
And to that point, right, so what steps is the Navy taking to shore up maritime trade, right, to ensure that our markets, ships, ports can support this increasing demand? Well,
first and foremost, we're trying to strengthen our maritime dominance, as I said earlier, in every domain that we operate in, which is all the domains exactly. We're also trying to grow our Navy and make it as capable as possible. Also by retiring some of the legacy systems that we have that no longer meet the high-end threats that we have to face today. But it's by developing this stronger, more capable, more lethal Navy that we hope to get to, that we can then protect the sea lanes of communications as we're doing in the Mediterranean and in the Red Sea. And also, through our partners in Ukraine, for example, and other partners around the Black Sea, ensuring that increased amount of grain shipments are actually coming out of the Black Sea to feed the world.
And of course, your suppliers, I know, are key partners
They are.
Maybe in this.
They are. And in many cases, some of what we do is provide increased amount of advanced procurement to allow those small businesses and medium-sized businesses to be properly financed so that they can support their prime contractors as well. I'm a big supporter of the small business community. Just this past year alone, the Department of the Navy has pumped in over $1 billion actually into the small business competitive market. We have increased the number of businesses that are now doing business with the Navy. We've added over 600 new businesses just last year alone to our supply chain so that we can get to a better place, we can be more competitive in the future, and actually hopefully bring down the prices of some of our goods and products.
Thank you. We talked a bit, of course, now about economics. Let's turn for a few moments to environmental security.
Sure.
The Navy obviously has critical facilities around the world, all of which are on or near the coast. These areas are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. As of 2021, the Navy maintained 82 primary activity stations, bases in 10 regions around the world, including activities in Hawaii, Guam, the Northern Marianas, and the Indo-Pacific. Arguably, the Navy might be the one service with the most reason to be concerned about climate change and obviously have a vested interest in mitigating it. Can you talk to your view?
Absolutely. It's been a top priority, not just for me, but for the entire enterprise since I've come in 2.5 years ago for both the Navy and the Marine Corps. And I'll note, for example, on the Marine Corps side that Athens, Georgia is a net zero energy installation, for example. We're striving actually to make the Naval Academy a net energy installation as well, too, by doing all sorts of innovative installations of solar panels and just other advanced technology basically to help get us there. But this is incredibly important. I mean, environmental readiness equals combat readiness. If you haven't noticed, most of our bases are by the sea. Rise in sea levels are a threat to our ability to actually deploy and to be combat ready. So we have to actually impose mitigating investments basically across the entire enterprise to help, both for installation, readiness as well as operational readiness as well too. So we're really investing a lot of money in technologies that go on our ships, on our aircraft to actually minimize the amount of fuel that we use so that we can actually be in a better place when it comes to overall climate readiness altogether. And also making investments with our allies and partners. You know, in Blue Oceania, in the Pacific, for example, countries, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, others, we're actually exporting a climate dashboard that we have developed to help these senior leaders in these nations who don't have a lot of resources to be able to use this dashboard to make the best decisions possible with the resources that they do have. So that's still another example of how we're working with our allies and partners to try to get to a better place.
Thank you. And recently, I understand that you had representatives at the Our Ocean Conference in Greece.
I did.
And that was certainly centered around national strategies to build coastal resilience. One of the topics, I believe, that came up there is unreported fishing, also known as IUU. Can you explain from the Navy's position why this is so critical?
It's incredibly important, and I attended the Oceans Conference last year in Panama. I'd hoped to get to the Oceans Conference this year in Greece, but operational circumstances with the self-defense of Israel prevented me from traveling, but one of my senior advisors, Steve Brock, represented me quite ably there. But on this issue of illegal fishing, it's incredibly important to us. When we talk to our allies and partners, there's two issues that rise to the very top in terms of their most important national security interest. One is climate and the impact that it has on their country, especially low-lying islands in the Caribbean and the Pacific, et cetera. And the second one is illegal fishing on the part of several countries, but mostly China with its 500-ship illegal fleets that basically go around the world invading the economic zones, extended economic zones of these nations that extend out typically, in most cases, 200 miles from, and they basically suck up their resources that these small nations depend on for their fragile economies in many cases. Mm-hmm. And how many of you gone to the Galapagos Islands, for example? Well, if you haven't gone recently and you want to go, you better hurry up because illegal fishing is actually having a very negative impact on that very fragile ecosystem in the Galapagos Islands. Is just one example. What a tragedy that would be if we wouldn't have the Galapagos Islands and the many species that are on those islands available for our children and our grandchildren to enjoy and flourish, right? So that's just another example. So we're being very proactive working with our allies and partners when it comes to unmanned technology, actually encouraging them to use unmanned technology along with us. So we have sail drones that we now employ around the world in the 5th Fleet, and we just exported them to the 4th Fleet, for example. And these are, imagine a sailboat basically, an unmanned sailboat that's like a virtual fleet that sails around 365 days, 24 hours a day. And what's great is they don't have sailors on it, so when they pull in a port, they won't get in trouble either. You can laugh at my jokes, please. But having said that, we're employing them in Central and South America for 3 purposes. One is to counter illegal drugs coming, mostly cocaine, over the Maritime into the southern border, the illegal flow of arms moving down into Central and South America, and to eventually get at illegal fishing around Central and South America, allowing our allies and partners to join in this experimentation basically with their own platforms that they develop in their own countries that they can afford to engage with. And so we're treating them as equals, as peers. We're all engaging together as allies and partners to defeat this really difficult challenge that they have in their extended economic zones. It's very exciting. I'm very passionate about this.
Yeah, that's great.
So.
You've spoken directly and indirectly about the Indo-Pacific.
Yes.
What I'd like to do is turn to that region from more of a traditional security
Sure.
perspective right now. I would say what's keeping you awake at night in that region, but I don't think we have time for all the things that I'm sure are keeping you awake right now. But how can we increase maritime cooperation and the capabilities to support peace in this region?
Well, I think we are. And in fact, to your last point and message there, it is to support peace. We want a peaceful, open, and free Indo-Pacific. And we have to strive to achieve a sustainable relationship with China and any other adversaries out there, quite frankly, that want to do differently, for example, right? And so we want to be able to pursue the norms of international behavior. That includes the free passage of trade and ships and airplanes wherever they're allowed to do so, right? And so that's what we strive to do. And so again, the relationship with our allies and partners and anybody else who's willing to come to the table with us to work together to solve these difficult issues is extremely, extremely important. Always, always respecting the sovereignty of those nations, such as the Philippines and the Japanese and Vietnam, who are contesting islands with China that they believe to be their own, for example, right? And so we have to be there with our allies and partners, be there to defend them when called upon, and to support them, and to work collectively with all these nations. And who would have imagined, for example, that 5 years ago, that we would be operating and engaging with the Japanese, the South Koreans, and the Philippines, and the United States together, along with Australia, New Zealand, and many other nations in the Pacific, all as one, with common interests in mind. And we hope that we could actually work with China and any other nation out there who wants to work with us. And I think it's very important for us to have increased communications, as we're currently having now. There's a naval conference going on in China. I hope it's proving itself to be very productive. I encourage that we have more of these engagements. In the past, it's China who really hasn't wanted to engage and communicate with us. I'm very pleased. I know our Secretary of Defense is very pleased to now again be having conversations with their defense minister as well, who's an admiral. And so these are all, I think, positive signs that we can get to a better place in our relationships moving forward so that we can maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific for the economies of all nations to benefit from. There's nothing good that comes from war. As a combat veteran myself, I can tell you that. Now, our responsibility obviously is called upon to be as ready as possible to win if necessary. But we don't want that. We want a peaceful coexistence we want so that the economies of all nations can benefit from this coexistence.
Thank you, and hopefully, as you articulate, there is an opportunity now more than ever to create some new sustainable approaches.
I hope so.
Well, I would be negligent if I didn't ask a question about the Marine Corps.
Of course.
Right?
My beloved Marines.
I know. Don't want them against me.
How about
here.
a hand of applause for the Major up here?
There we go. Well done. And as we know, the Marine Corps are a critical factor in the U.S.'s maritime strategy in the Indo-Pacific and elsewhere. And historically, the role of the Marines has been to project power at sea and at shore, as I know you know. We're seeing these twin imperatives playing out more than ever now, both in terms of need and criticality. While the Marines' traditional mission set has arguably never been more relevant, the institution is undergoing some major transformations to evolve to meet the challenges of today or tomorrow. What do you think are some of the greatest opportunities for the U.S. Marine Corps going forward in the future?
You know, I think the Marine Corps has set the standard when it comes to innovation and transformation in the Department of Defense. The things that they've done over the course of the past 5 years, even before I got here, are truly to be respected in so many different ways. And after 20 years of a more traditional mission, basically fighting wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and looking for the bad guys and so forth, you know, to be able to shift the way that they have to an expeditionary mission in support of the Navy Marine Corps team, and more importantly, our joint forces across the entire Indo-Pacific, has been extraordinary. And so they have made some truly transformational changes in the capabilities that they actually purchase, that they acquire, their commitment to essentially medium-range fires and long-range fires, and actually providing reconnaissance and counter-reconnaissance. It's all about the expeditionary advanced basing operations across the entire Pacific. And I had the opportunity a month ago, and it was a great honor for me actually to go to Palau, meet with President Whipps actually, and I'm so thankful to the Congress to finally pass the COFA agreement to provide those nations the support, the economic support that they need. But he actually took me to Peleliu, and where we lost 6,500 courageous Marines in the Battle of Peleliu. And there on Peleliu, we're actually extracting from the jungle the old airfield, 6,000 feet of airfield, so that we could actually conduct expeditionary advanced based operations and conduct our strategy of stand-in forces as well that the Marine Corps is embracing, and bring these long-range fires to any island around the Indo-Pacific if called upon. And we're also providing them the heavy lift that they need in terms of ships to be able to transport Marines over long distances, as well as the smaller platforms in the case of the LSM, for example, for them to be able to do inter-island operations as well, too. So I'm very supportive of their strategy and everything that they're doing. We're fully behind it. I'm glad the Congress is fully behind it as well, too. And I think they're moving in exactly the direction that they need to be able to make the biggest contribution to the joint warfighting experience. And I'll add, I also took my oath of office in front of the Iwo Jima Memorial in honor of all our Marines who served in Afghanistan and Iraq for many, many decades. And I also named the USS Fallujah in honor of all the brave men and women who actually served in Iraq. And there'll be another major announcement coming out of Modern Day Marine Conference coming up here next week. If you'd like to attend, you could find out what the major announcement will be.
A little hook.
A little recruiting for the Marines there.
Exactly. Great accomplishments and transition and evolution. What gaps do you think remain? What would be the priorities?
Yeah, no, look, we're again, in my opinion, because of the strength of the economy that this administration has contributed to deeply these past 3 years, basically, unemployment is extremely low throughout the United States. And if you look at historically, when unemployment has been high, recruiting has been easy. When unemployment has been low, recruiting has been a challenge. And I'm not hoping for a bad economy. I want the economy to keep chugging along as strong as it is. But we face some challenges in recruiting, for example. And again, the Marines, in this case, have really stood up and met their mark. They continue to meet their recruiting goals and requirements, but it's been tough. And it's been tough on the Navy side, and it's been tough across the Department of Defense as well. But that's great. I'm calling out for a call to service, basically, when it comes to everyone helping the armed services recruit. And in fact, if there's anybody here who actually would like to join the Navy and Marine Corps, I'm willing to take the oath of office, to give you the oath of office right outside the door afterwards. But we do need all Americans to actually help in this endeavor, and that's one of the gaps that I think we face today as a nation in trying to recruit more people to the Department of Defense.
Thank you. You mentioned that the White House recently hosted a significant Japan state visit as well as a Japan-Philippines-U.S. summit. Coming on the back of these meetings, what does the Navy stand to gain in terms of potential maritime benefits of the strong bilateral and trilateral cooperation? What's your vision of what flows?
Yeah, for us, it's really becoming that much more interoperable with regards to our Marine forces working together and our Navies working together. And when you look at some of the decisions that were made out of this last gathering, their commitment, for example, to buy additional TLAM capabilities, which provides long-range anti-ship cruise missile capability for a strong ally like Japan to have that capability off their shores, is really, really significant to us, for example. And we will work with the Japanese. They've bought our Aegis weapon systems in the past. It's on their destroyers. They're building their destroyer-like aircraft carrier capabilities as well, too, so that they can interoperate with F-35s. So it's building those ties together so that our forces can actually operate together when called upon in operations and, God forbid, in conflict. That really makes a huge difference, and that work needs to be done now in times of peace so we can deter from having to go to war in the future.
Thank you. One last question before I open it up for Q&A from the floor. And this one, again, you mentioned earlier, Mr. Secretary, around piracy by non-state actors. Last year, we saw Iran-backed militants attacking commercial shipping vessels in the Red Sea. Earlier this year, a U.S.-owned cargo vessel came under attack from the Houthis in the Gulf of Aden. And again, Iran has also been blamed for recent drone attacks on shipping. How does the Navy look to address some of these root causes? How do we approach this in a different way from naval defense against state-sanctioned maritime activity?
Well, our mission in the Department of Defense and in the Department of the Navy is to always be combat ready to be able to deter. But obviously, the root causes of these problems often lies in diplomacy, right? And so, yes, in many cases, all roads lead back to Iran. There's no doubt about that. But we need a diplomatic solution in Gaza, for example. But our job is to deter. And for the past 6.5 months, your Navy, your Marine Corps, has been batting back daily Houthi attacks to over 200 engagements, basically, in 6.5 months. And we have been able to save lives. We've been able to save lives of our own sailors and Marines. We've been able to save the lives of innocent merchant mariners, who basically are the ones who carry out and execute this peaceful trade globally, basically. And it's having also a very negative impact on the countries of Egypt, for example, and other surrounding countries of trade going through the Suez Canal that now has to go around the Cape, for example. So it has, it's terrorism of its worst kind, quite frankly, very similar to what used to take place when the Navy was first founded by John Adams, right? And Benjamin Stoddard, who was the first Secretary of the Navy. So that still remains our mission today, and I'd like to think that over the course of the 6.5 months, the Navy and Marine Corps really has proven their worth, their return on investment on American taxpayers and what they've invested in our strong maritime power.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's a great time to turn to the audience and get some questions. I'm going to please remind everyone that we don't have much time, so if you can please be very succinct in your questions and go from there.
And I do apologize. I have a really significant meeting I've got to go back to with the Secretary of Defense, but I am leaving you here with the most powerful individual in the Department of the Navy, my comptroller, Russ, who will remain and answer any questions that I can't get to.
There you go.
Hey, Russ Rombach.
Great. Thank you. Okay, let's go over here.
You got some details on the potential cost savings that could result from a multi-ship buy of the amphibious warships that are scheduled for the fit-up. I'm wondering if there are any, concrete plans for putting those ships on contract, and can you just give us sort of the timeline or the considerations that are going into that?
No, I think you'll see something here very soon, and I mean that. I'm not going to get into the details of the negotiations with the actual shipyard, but in the case of the amphibious multi-year procurement, which is what I think you're referring to, we hope to be able to take a 4-ship buy basically with the LPDs and the 1 LHA that's at play here, and be able to negotiate as low a price as we possibly can. And so I think you'll see something come out of this in a couple of weeks, hopefully at the most. Multi-ship, multi-year procurements in the right numbers are a powerful tool to save the American taxpayer dollars. And we strive to do that with our surface ships, with our aircraft carriers. For example, if we were to purchase 2 aircraft carriers again in the future, CVN 82 and 83, we would save billions of American taxpayer dollars by doing so. And so we'll do the same thing here with these amphibious ships as well.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. My question is specifically regarding the methods to bring down the delays on the current ships, such as the frigates and the Indo-Virginia class models. What are the methods that the Navy plans on to bring down these delays, and also for the frigates themselves, with the design problems that were going on because of the ever-changing designs? What's the method?
And what's your name and what company are you from?
Kaiser One American Enterprise Institute.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. No, look, we're working very, very closely with industry. Let me answer the question concerning the frigate. They have had some real retention problems at the shipyards. We're working very closely with them to try to provide them additional incentives to pay their shipyard workers so that they could actually stay longer periods of time. With regards to the design teamwork, we've actually sent a big team from over 50 design engineers, basically from Naval Sea Systems Command, basically to go live and work side by side with them in Wisconsin to accelerate the amount of time, or to minimize the amount of time necessary to get to the final design and the digitization of the frigate so they can actually move to production work a lot faster. We also are doing some things internally to the Navy, for example, by hiring more contracting officers, contracting specialists. We're also trying to ensure that when we send ships into availabilities, we complete the planning of it 6 months in advance, which makes a huge difference in terms of finishing that maintenance availability on time. We also need more young people from universities to come actually join our civilian workforce in the Department of the Navy. It's a great thing to serve in government. It really is. It's satisfying beyond all measures. The things that you learn are extraordinary. And then later on, when you get older, you can go into the private sector and make more money. And if you change your mind, you can just also become an active duty Marine or a sailor. But these are some of the efforts that we're actually trying to put in place to actually shorten those timelines that were advertised a few weeks ago.
Thank you. Over here up in front.
Mr. Secretary, I'm Roy Capani from C Corp Corporation. It's great to see you again.
Good to
And
see you, sir.
one of the most wonderful things is to have a secretary that's also had founded and run a business here, and so you understand the pain points of procurement all too well.
Yes.
My question really is,
And your dark secret.
procurement is a critical and strategic part of delivering operational capabilities. We've noticed a change in the demand signal from straight services to systems integrations and product development work that's coming along. Signals for unmanned systems and acceleration of R&D projects being put into production. However, many of the traditional legacy IDIQ contracts are more staff augmentation and services based. Is there any discussion to try to evolve the procurement vehicles now to better match some of the reindustrialization efforts that the Navy is pursuing?
Look, I think we're trying to put a lot of innovative thoughts and processes in place. I mean, since I've been secretary, I've stood up the Disruptive Capabilities Office to tackle this issue of actually the long amount of time it takes to acquire products from the commercial marketplace. You know, I often reflect on that since about the 1980s, prior to the 1980s, a lot of the innovation actually took place in government. Since the 1980s, quite frankly, most of it has come from the private sector, and you could use space as an example of that, right? We in the government have to get better at actually acquiring and embracing those commercial off-the-shelf technologies the best that we can and applying them to our warfighting requirements in the military, and then to be able to contract them out a lot quicker. So we're trying to do the best that we can and being as innovative as we can. I stood up the Marine Corps Innovative Unit in Troy, New York, for example. We're going to stand up the Navy's Innovation Center at Monterey, California here in a couple of years as well, too, although they're already in motion, basically. The building will come in a couple of years for this very purpose, to work closer with the private sector, invite them in earlier in our requirements definitions, for example. This could all be done before the RFP actually hits the street. Once the RFP hits the street, then there shouldn't be engagement with industry. But beforehand, I'm encouraging a lot more engagement with the industry. You know, you pointed out my 17 years of private sector experience, which I am as equally thankful to my 22 years of naval operational experience. I may be the only Secretary of the Navy in our nation's history who's actually ever overseen the actual construction of a ship. So having that personal insight helps me tremendously in trying to move the Department of the Navy forward. But it's still not easy. You know, it takes a lot of concerted effort, especially when you're building these massive, multi-billion-dollar capital ships like aircraft carriers and submarines. I don't think there's a platform there we have that's very simple. They're all very complicated, and it takes a lot of effort on the part of a lot of good people in government and industry working together as one team to affect that change.
One question that we received online from Nicholas Vostef from the U.S. Naval War College, right?
I'm also the only Secretary of the Navy to have graduated from the Navy War College.
Really?
This is what happens when you have a historian. They tell you these things. I had no idea.
That's a good piece of information.
It is. It is.
He asks, does a strategy based on maritime statecraft require that we change our mental map of the world to think in terms of transoceanic regions across the major waterways? For instance, how East Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia increasingly form an integrated region in terms of trade and security.
Oh,
A softball.
My naval officers are getting smarter. That's why I sent them to the Navy War College. I will tell you, before answering, the answer to his question is yes. But this is the reason why I have invested so heavily in the past 2.5 years in professional military education. We need to send our very best and brightest young officers, while they're still lieutenant commanders and lieutenant colonels, to our primary educational institutions like the Navy War College, like the Marine War College in Quantico, Virginia, so they can think along these lines. Yes, to not just think along regional lines that are shared by regional commanders, but how we could actually work across the Atlantic, for example, between the eastern coast of Central and South America and the west coast of Africa that have so many economic interests that tie in together. And so, yes, the short answer is yes, we need to think more along those those lines. And I expect to read his thesis once he graduates from the War College so I could hear what he has to say.
I'm sure he's heard that and appreciates
I hear
it.
it. In fact, track me down next time I'm up in Newport, or I don't want to have a conversation with you.
Great. One more very quick question. We're almost out of time.
Mr. Secretary, great to see you again. Brian Eiler from the Stimson Center,
Yes, sir.
Director of Southeast
see you,
Asia
Brian.
Program. Good to see you. Kind of following on to the mental map question, we've been following some newer movements that are kind of PRC-led in Southeast Asia, such as the Kra land bridge that goes across the Isthmus of Kra, a new canal connecting Phnom Penh to the Gulf of Thailand, Chinese warships at Ream. How is the Navy working with partners and allies to ensure that the status quo might not be changed, or to work constructively to address these changes?
Look, we need to strive for peaceful coexistence. And I'm not saying that other nations, shouldn't be trading with China and having good economic relations with China. They should. We do, in fact. We have to find that sustainable relationship with China moving forward. But what we have to ensure is that it's not just being done for nefarious reasons, right? And to undermine the national security of the United States, the national security interests of the United States, the economic interests of the United States, and the national security and economic interests of our allies and partners collectively as well, too, right? So that's what we sort of strive for. But if you haven't figured it out, my personality leads me to engagement. I think we need to be engaged. We need to be forward. We need to be engaged. We need to be conversing with our allies and partners and conversing also with our potential adversaries, hopefully through diplomacy, so that we could actually avoid conflict and war in the future. And I think that that's the strategy that President Biden is trying to actually build towards in every possible part of the world, in fact. And that's what we try to support him on in every endeavor.
So sadly, time remaining
is up.
is short, right? But I have one final question,
Sure.
Very quickly, and I'd like to end where we started with the upcoming 250 years of impact and history of the Navy. You mentioned the first Secretary of the Navy, appointed by John Adams in 1798.
Favorite of mine.
I mean, what would he think of our Navy today? What advice would he provide? And in
great
that
question.
context, how do you juggle all the priorities you have?
I have a loving wife of 40 years. We've been married 40 years, and she's extraordinary. So that answers the last question,
Congratulations,
perhaps. But look, I think the first secretary would be proud of what our Navy and Marine Corps has built today. When you take a look at, for example, the U.S.'s Constitution in the late 1790s, when it was built, for example, it was at the leading edge of innovation and technology. Old Ironsides, called Ironsides because the cannonballs would actually bounce off, because it was constructed in such a way, because of its naval architecture and the materials that were used to construct the ship itself and its hull, the cannonballs were ineffective, basically, right? And there lies the beauty of even innovation and technology then. For me today, it is all about innovation and technology. Asymmetrically, how can we make our fleet and force that much more capable, that much more modern? We may not be able to just build an endless numbers of ships, but boy, the ones that we're building, let's make them so powerful, so capable, so lethal. And also our investments in cyberspace, right? Cybersecurity, and in space as well too, which has asymmetric impact on our adversaries' ability to actually wage war. We don't talk a lot about that, but we invest heavily in those areas as well too. So I would argue that the Secretary would be quite happy with where we are today with our 11 aircraft carriers and we have 89 ships under construction in the United States Navy today. I'm not sure that he would be able to fathom that. And do we have challenges? Of course we have challenges, but you know what? It actually took the Constitution nearly 2 months to get out of its dry dock because of complications it was having, both environmental as well as technical. So some things do persist, but we will overcome those with the right spirit. And again, my cup is always half full, and I'm confident that we'll be able to meet the national defense requirements that the President has called us to meet.
Thank you. Well, I thank all of you for being with us today, and please join me in thanking the Secretary.
Thank you.